1934. The country has been living through hard times for 5 years now. And even at $1.50, tickets for pro hockey games are too much for most fans. The National Hockey League is fighting for its life. Some teams are sold, others fold. Of the 10 teams that made up the NHL in the late 20s, only 6 will survive the Depression. The Ottawa Senators, 7-time winners of the Stanley Cup, will not.
Welcome to Good Seats Still Available, a curious little podcast devoted to exploring what used to be in professional sports. Here's your host, Tim Hanlon.
All right, friends, how are you? It's another episode into the realm of ice hockey, and we've had a couple of interesting episodes in weeks and months past around a number of more modern NHL franchises, and certainly the WHA has gotten a fair treatment here on this little show, and many more of those to come in the weeks and months to follow. But we're going to go back into the earliest, let's call it primordial ooze of the National Hockey League, which is also an amazing and interesting time and era. And yes, there were teams that were not just the original 6. I think a lot of people kind of look back and frankly don't recognize they think that the history of the NHL was just the original 6 until 1967 and the Great Expansion. But alas, no, the answer is not that. There were a bunch of teams in a very fledgling late 19-teens and early 1920s that sort of begot or morphed into, that's the better term, I guess, into what is now known as the National Hockey League. And there are teams like the Montreal Wanderers and the Toronto Arenas, the New York Americans, a very interesting franchise, the Montreal Maroons, very competitive team to the Montreal Canadiens. Heck, even the Philadelphia Quakers for a season. All bunches of teams that were part of the original hard scrabble and undetermined parts of what then gelled into the original 6, or was called the original 6 in the NHL. I think people think the original 6 means literally the original, and it is not the case. And that is the topic of our conversation this week with our guest, Andrew Ross. He, the author of Joining the Clubs, The Business of the National Hockey League to 1945. And we're going to be talking about some of those early times, early years, the formative years of what is now the National Hockey League, and how sort of the business of professional hockey kind of got going, got started, got congealed into the modern era, shall we say. And as you can hear in our conversation with Andrew, this is frankly the beginning of perhaps a 2, maybe even 3-part story of how the history and the economic history of professional hockey, especially the NHL in this country and in Canada, of course, sort of became the standard that we know it today. A very interesting conversation, and arguably the beginning of perhaps a few others to come with Andrew Ross. He, the author of Joining the Clubs, in just a couple of seconds. I want to remind you that we've got we got a bunch of tremendous sponsors, but 2 in particular I want to call out now. One is oldschoolshirts.com out of Cincinnati, and the promo code GOODSEATS to get 10% off of all of your purchases. At oldschoolshirts.com, you're going to find NHL, you're going to find WHA, you're going to find a bunch of hockey stuff, shirts, and even some of the arenas that some of those teams played in. Lovingly remembered and high-quality T-shirt form. Oldschoolshirts.com. Make sure you use the promo code GOODSEATS and get 10% off all of your purchases. We thank P.F. Wilson and his friends at oldschoolshirts.com for sponsoring our little show, and hopefully you'll find a few hockey items that you're going to love and enjoy. And I do think you'll also find a few hockey items that you're going to love and enjoy from said leagues, the NHL, the WHA, etc., even others, some minor leagues and all that kind of stuff at sportshistorycollectibles.com. Use the promo code GOODSEATS there at sportshistorycollectibles.com and get, wait for it, 15% off of all your purchases, courtesy of Dean Mitchell and friends there. Some great hockey stuff there. Hell, there's a really cool beanie hat from Mitchell and Ness of the old Kansas City Scout.